Damn. What's good? It's Woog. Gervonta Tank Davis knocks out Frank Martin in the 8th round. And this was a dramatic knockout. This was one of those highlight reel knockouts. It was a little reminiscent of when Canelo Alvarez knocked out Sergey Kovalev, in that Gervonta Davis hit Frank Martin with an uppercut. In the case of Canelo, it was a left hook, but Davis kind of led Frank Martin with a scooping right hook to kind of guide Frank Martin's head in a certain direction. He follows it up with a nice uppercut that Frank Martin doesn't see. And Frank Martin he doesn't kind of buckle. He's pretty much out on his feet. I don't know how he stood up, how he did not fall with that uppercut, because his legs bent, but the ropes but didn't exactly catch him. He didn't go down, but he's out on his feet, thereby giving Gervonta Davis basically a free shot. And Gervonta Davis leaned into that one, just caught him flush, and that was the punch that sent Frank Martin on his back looking up at the lights. So this is a knockout that you're going to be seeing in the years to come when they show Tank Davis highlights. This was one of those knockouts, and it was a competitive fight. Now, in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about Tank versus Frank. We're going to talk about David Benavidez's unanimous decision win over Alexander Gvozdyk. That was another competitive fight. I think it was more competitive than a lot of people thought it would be, which I don't know how you could assume that Benavidez was just going to run over a former champion with only one loss in a competitive fight to Artur Beterbiev, who, yes, was out of the ring for 3.5 or so years, but this was David Benavidez's light heavyweight debut. It's not like he had a couple tune-ups and then fought a former champion. So it was a unanimous decision win for David Benavidez. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about Liam Paro upsetting Subriel Matias in Puerto Rico. So is this one of those homecoming fight curses where the hometown fighter underperforms in front of his home crowd? Or was this Liam Paro being a lot better than most of us assumed that he was? Now, I did make one bet on this weekend, and it was that Matias versus Paro goes over 7.5 rounds. I picked Matias to win super late, but I did think that Liam Paro was going to fight him in a way that didn't just play into Matias's strengths. Like we saw how Ergashev fought him. We saw how Jukimbayev fought him back in the day. We saw how Ananian fought him in the rematch. Ananian beat Matias via decision in their first fight, but all of these fighters, Hedemias Ponce, same thing. All of these opponents are coming at Matias, not forcing Matias to use his legs. So they're kind of coming to meet him in the phone booth and are willing to exchange 5-punch combinations and just exchange mid-range hooks time and time again, where it becomes a battle of who's going to break who. Well, Matias has proven to be kind of unbreakable in that style of fight. So I thought that at the very least, Liam Paro had the boxing IQ to not just automatically play into Matias's hands. And I mean, we got a little bit more than that, as Liam Paro is now the IBF 140-pound champion. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. In other fights that we're not going to dive as deep on, but I just want to, give a couple of the results. Chris Billam-Smith defeated Richard Riakporhe via unanimous decision. Riakporhe simply wasn't throwing enough punches. Chris Billam-Smith just outworked him, outslugged him. And every time Richard Riakporhe would have a moment, Chris Billam-Smith would come right back and throw more combinations to arguably steal the round. So he won anywhere between 9 and 11 rounds in this fight. Yes, it was a competitive fight, but it wasn't a difficult fight to determine the winner. So yeah, props to Chris Billam-Smith. I mean, people are going to have to start putting some respect on his name. Not only has he now taken the belt from Lawrence Okoli, but he's also beaten Richard Riakporhe. So I think that it's time. I think we want to see, or at least most of us would want to see, a cruiserweight unification between Jai Opetaia and Chris Billam-Smith. Or if we can't get that, maybe Zordo Ramirez versus Chris Billam-Smith, or any combination of fights between those three guys. But yeah, the cruiserweight division, at least in its uppermost tier, is looking pretty interesting, and props to Chris Billam-Smith. And Carlos Adames holds on to his title, winning a competitive fight against Terrell Goucher. That also happened on that Amazon pay-per-view card, and I also witnessed one of the worst scorecards of the year as Kyron Davis outboxed and upset Elijah Garcia, and one of the judges had Elijah Garcia winning that fight by a few rounds. Also, Gary Antoine Russell was upset by Alberto Puello, which, you know, you might be surprised at the result, but how could you not think that this was going to be a competitive fight? Yes, Gary Antoine Russell's been looking really good, been beating some fighters, you know, early, but Alberto Puello is a former champion, undefeated, who lost his belt because of the PED. So yeah, it's like, okay, there was some inactivity for Puello, but I mean, he did beat Batir Akhmedov, and the guy is a very good fighter. So I'm not surprised at that result. It was a very competitive fight, and it took on the shape of Puello just looking like he never really lost his posture. He's got this commanding stance in the ring, and it looked like he was counterpunching effectively. It looked like Gary Antoine Russell was unable to turn the fight into his style of fight. So I'm not mad at that result, but let's get into Gervonta Davis and his knockout over Frank Martin. Now, I haven't looked at the scorecards myself, but I read that all three judges had it at the time of the knockout. They had it 4 rounds to 3 for Gervonta Davis, with the first 3 rounds going to Frank Martin, and then the next 4 rounds going to Tank Davis. I had it at the time 4-3 for Frank Martin, so I had it 4-3 the other way, but you could totally tell that Gervonta Davis was starting to build momentum, was starting to walk Frank Martin down. Frank Martin, when he would decide to counter Tank, when Tank would commit and come in and explode, and Frank Martin would try to return fire with something big, those led to some pretty combustible looking exchanges where you're watching it like, damn, someone's about to get hurt. And Gervonta Davis kind of had this determined look, and he kind of has that, okay, you know, I'm going to keep on marching forward type of energy that makes you kind of feel like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, Frank Martin was throwing very hard shots, and he was, you know, boxing very well. I mean, he won the first 3 rounds. I think that there was a moment where, well, actually there were 2 kind of interesting moments in the fighter corners. In one of the corners, Gervonta Davis, I think I heard him say to Calvin Ford, his trainer, that, yeah, he's got some power. I think that I heard that. He said he's got a little power. That's if I heard that correctly. And then a few rounds later, when they were talking to Frank Martin in the corner, they're saying, he's not hitting you with nothing, you know, and then instructing him on how to outbox Tank. And Frank Martin was like, well, except for a few body shots. He caught me with a few body shots. He said something like that. But yeah, this was a very interesting fight. And it's often interesting when you see Frank, or rather Tank, give up some rounds, because you're thinking, okay, does he need a knockout? Now, in this fight, he didn't need a knockout. We were only in the 8th round, and the tide had turned. But you saw how Frank Martin was trying to stand his ground, because, and I agree with him in the post-fight interview, if you have the strategy of moving around the ring and trying to avoid the power puncher, and you are going to use your legs throughout the fight to kind of stay on your bike, well, that might work in the first few rounds, but you're going to start to tire and become less elusive in the second half of the fight. We saw it with Rashidi Ellis in his loss to Roman Villa. We see it in certain fights. I mean, Liam Paro was able to eventually stand his ground, which you need to do at a point. You can move in the first few rounds, but there comes a point where you have to draw the line in the sand, and then you have to decide to exchange, or to at least start jabbing and backing up the aggressor. You know what I mean? If you don't do that, then it's going to almost be this bend but don't break defense, as they call it in the NFL. It's going to be bend but don't break, but it's going to give the illusion, or it's going to give the optics, that this guy is making you retreat, making you fold, and you aren't strong enough to maintain your positioning, and you just keep on getting flushed out of the pocket. Frank Martin decided, and again, Liam Paro did a very good job at this, backing Subriel Matias up in spots. Frank Martin started to try to do some of the same things, and it was working in certain spots, but you could only play that Russian roulette with Tank Davis for so long before something really bad happens to you. Now, Subriel Matias is more of a combination puncher, so he's going to break you down with the volume. I was saying before the fight, and I did pick Matias to stop Paro late, but I thought that Paro would be competitive, and again, I bet on the over 7.5 rounds. But Matias, I thought that they should give him the nickname Popcorn, because when you watch him fight and he starts flowing downhill and he starts letting his hands go, it starts kind of making that bag of popcorn popping sound where it's just clusters of punches like pop, 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 and he's just letting these two-fisted combinations go. But Liam Paro, again, was backing Matias up in moments. And yes, he was clinching when he had to. Yes, he was moving when he had to. But he was throwing a lot of punches. And again, he was coming forward a lot, sometimes with the head. But he was doing enough to outwork Matias, especially, I mean, Matias let like the first 3 or 4 rounds go with hardly throwing a punch. That part was weird. And again, we're going to get back to that fight. But Frank Martin, again, was trying to maintain his constitution, but you started seeing him get worked into the ropes more and more in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and obviously 8th rounds. He would get worked into the ropes. He would get worked into the corners, where you've got these 50-50 exchanges where either one of these guys could get badly hurt. It's like gunslingers. Okay, I'm going to take a risk. You're going to take a risk. Let's let 2 to 3 punches go. Those are those dangerous exchanges. And you started seeing a lot of trickery from Tank Davis. He was throwing a lot of feints. Frank Martin was throwing some good feints as well. They were both feinting each other, and they were both respecting each other's power. Again, I think that Tank Davis respected Frank Martin's power, especially as he walked into a couple big Frank Martin shots. I mean, there were a couple of exchanges where I was like, damn, is Frank about to hurt Tank? But you started then seeing Tank like double up on straight left hands when he would get Frank into a corner. Like sometimes he would go to the body and then go up top. So Tank was committing to Frank's body, but then he would change the punch pattern where instead of going right, left, or left, right, sometimes he would start going left, right, left. So he would double up on those hard left hands, where if Frank Martin, who was rolling with shots really well throughout the first half of the fight, so even when Tank would get off, you would see that Frank would kind of be moving with it. So instead of working to what Frank Martin expects you to do, if Frank Martin is already expecting to go like this based on your punch pattern, well, again, Tank would start going left, especially when Frank would start like kind of moving downward and sort of ducking. Tank Davis would start throwing double left hands in a chopping downward motion. And I think he started catching Frank Martin with some of those. And then you would see like different punches kind of coming out of nowhere where everything was with a setup. So Tank would like jab and then throw a left hand low. And then he would throw just like a vicious like right hook where he just looks like he's trying to take the guy's head off. And Frank Martin was doing a good job ducking and avoiding a lot of those sweeping hooks, those kind of home run shots. Frank was good defensively, but again, the more and more he started getting worked into the ropes, into the corner, he became tougher to track down and to hit. And what happens when you start going into the ropes is you've got no more real estate to back up and to make that dimension a part of your defense. So what are those dimensions? You could either go forward or back. So you could come in and crowd the guy. You could back up and get out of range. You could move laterally, left and right, and then you can move up and down and change levels that way. And the same thing applies to just regular movement and even offense. You can move laterally in that dimension. You can move forward and back in that dimension. You can move up and down. When you go into the ropes, you've pretty much lost that dimension, unless you're like Tyson Fury, 6'7", 6'9", where you can start backing up on the ropes to where your head is out of play because of how much give those ropes have, where you could kind of lean back and defend that way. But if you're 5'8"-ish like Frank Martin and you're into the ropes, well, you're not going to go through the ropes. So you've just lost the element of being able to back up. So at that point, you've got to come in and clinch, or you should move laterally and circle out of that position. But sometimes Frank Martin would be standing there for too long. And he explained why. He said, again, I had to stand my ground. I couldn't keep moving. That was going to be a losing strategy. And you saw how quickly when he would try to move with his legs and circle out or move across the ring, Tank Davis would just pursue him, almost like jog up to him and close that distance within like a second, and then put him under duress. Again, even the threat of Tank Davis punches is enough to stress out opponents. Tank doesn't even have to always let his hands go. He just has to be in range, near range, and there has to be the threat of the punch. And then, of course, you get the actual punches from Tank Davis. So you saw the stress building on Frank Martin over the course of the middle rounds. And again, he got caught up on the ropes one too many times in that 8th round. Tank Davis started throwing those chopping left hands. He threw that right hook to, again, lead and guide Frank Martin over this way. So then, again, he could throw that left uppercut that caught Frank Martin so flush. Again, Frank Martin dipped in the knees, was kind of out on his feet, didn't even see that next punch coming. Like, they could have, if the ref Harvey Dock, wanted to make the move and jump in and to call that a standing knockdown, I don't know. It's kind of tough because the ropes kind of caught him, but didn't really prevent him from falling. Like, he prevented himself from falling because, again, there was a dip in the knees, but he didn't go down. So technically, no, the ropes didn't catch you. So it's the right call, I guess, not to call it a standing knockdown. But in not falling down, you gave Tank Davis a free shot to just throw his most wicked and straight shot, and Tank Davis just laid him flat with that punch. Again, it was a little reminiscent of Canelo knocking Kovalev out by putting him out on his feet with the left hook and then having the free shot with the straight right hand to truly sink Kovalev. So yeah, another scary good performance from Tank Davis. And I think that at this point, given what Lomachenko just did to Kambosos and what Tank did to Frank, I think that most of us, and let me know if you would rather see Tank fight Shakur Stevenson or somebody else right now. I mean, in a perfect world, I would rather see Shakur Stevenson, if he gets past Haratunian, to either unify against Dennis Berinchyk. So now you've got 2 belts if you're Shakur, so you're making yourself a less avoidable, more attractive opponent, because Shakur Stevenson's having difficulty getting those fights that matter. All of the other stars are looking in other directions. That's what it's been for the most part up until this point. So if you get a second belt, it makes it more appealing for the other champions in the division to want to fight you. So you could either fight Dennis Berinchyk, who beat Navarrete, or you could beat a boogeyman in the lightweight division in William Zepeda. If they could somehow cross promotionally with William Zepeda being a golden boy fighter who fights on DAZN and Shakur Stevenson being a top ranked fighter, at least at this part of his deal. I think he's about to fight his last fight on his current contract with Top Rank, so we'll see how that goes. But if they could work out Shakur Stevenson versus William Zepeda, that would be a very meaningful fight, and that would be such an important win if Shakur Stevenson is up to the task and is able to beat the super high volume, dangerous, just an absolute handful William Zepeda. So I would rather Shakur Stevenson go in one of those 2 directions while we get arguably the most important fight that could go down at lightweight, being Gervonta Davis versus future Hall of Famer Vasily Lomachenko. Like, I want to see that fight take place. I don't know how it's going to happen given the promotional politics, but I feel like that is a fight that cannot get away. You know how it's probable that we'll never get Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder? We never got Lomachenko versus Mikey Garcia. I feel like that was a very important fight that should have happened, that didn't happen. I feel like boxing will be better off if it gets Gervonta Davis versus Vasily Lomachenko. But let me know your thoughts on that one. And with David Benavidez versus Gvozdyk, Gvozdyk was very formidable. I thought that once David Benavidez started letting his hands go to the body, I thought that he was going to be able to break Gvozdyk down over time. But Gvozdyk, to his credit, was able to maintain his shape. He didn't start to lose form. He didn't start to tie up and look too distressed, even when he was getting caught cleanly to the body and up top. And he was boxing well. I mean, he was sticking that jab in there. The power punches were a little bit lopsided towards Benavidez just because he was throwing a higher percentage of power punches relative to his jabs. Now, Benavidez does have a good jab, and through much of this fight, it looked like Benavidez had a better jab than Gvozdyk. But Gvozdyk was very game, and he was very durable. And again, this is David Benavidez's debut fight. So it kind of bothers me when you hear the commentators start to make excuses for Benavidez, like he's doing something wrong or something. Now, he gets hit sometimes. He's got pretty good defense. I feel like his defense is actually underrated, but it's like, because he didn't just wash Gvozdyk it's almost like the commentators had to think of excuses to start making for Benavidez to explain why Gvozdyk was still standing there throwing punches back. I'm like, hello, he's a former champion who's a very good fighter, and he's arguably physically stronger or maybe as strong as David Benavidez. David Benavidez is going up, 7 pounds. The opponents are going to be able to hit, harder. You look at Benavidez's face after that fight, he got lumped up, and your opponents are able to take bigger punches. So is Benavidez's power going to be able to carry to light heavyweight? I think that it's still yet to be determined. Like, sometimes you could grow into a division and get stronger in the division over time, like Terrence Crawford at welterweight. Now he's knocked out all of his welterweight opponents. Let's get that out there, starting with Jeff Horn and then every fighter at welterweight after that. But Bomac thought that it would take Crawford a few fights to be ready for Errol Spence, who was the true welterweight, and that Crawford would get stronger in the division over time. I think that that might be the case with David Benavidez, but this was a pretty tough baptism against a good opponent, and the good opponent fought a competitive fight. Now, one of the scorecards had a 119-109, which was crazy. That means that you're giving David Benavidez 11 out of the 12 rounds. That didn't happen. Like, I know Joe Goosen had a super pro Benavidez scorecard, but Gvozdyk, to me, won maybe 3 rounds. You could even stretch it to 4 rounds. At the least, I would say 2 rounds. So anywhere between maybe 2 and 4 rounds. So Benavidez won the fight. I mean, the other 2 judges' scorecards, again, one of them was 11-1 for Benavidez. The other was 116-112. So that's 8 rounds to 4. And the other one was 9 rounds to 3, 117-111. So yeah, 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4. Those feel about right. So I don't watch this fight and think less of David Benavidez, who was, again, letting his hands go, but he throws a lot of wide punches. I think, certain fighters like Paulie Malignaggi, they will use this phrase that the guy's got a lot of fat on his punches. David Benavidez often has that, but it works sometimes because of how he changes levels. He'll go to the body, then he'll look low, throw high. That's how he caught Demetrius Andrade. So he'll sometimes throw these wide looping shots, and he caught Gvozdyk with some of these, but it also gives the opponent opportunities to throw straight shots, to even a jab, but to throw something out there that David Benavidez is basically moving into, and you don't have to throw that hard to have a big impact when somebody's moving at you. So there was a lot of that, and again, David Benavidez was getting caught with some of those. There were some rounds where Benavidez looked like he was a bit tired. He was kind of going back into the ropes, and he looked like he was just letting Gvozdyk, I thought he was letting Gvozdyk burn some energy, but then other times I was thinking maybe he just truly is tired. Maybe he needs to take a little break, and maybe the incoming fire is a little bit harder than he expected it to be. He said after the fight that he kind of expected Gvozdyk to be a tough, formidable opponent, but I don't know. It wasn't an easy fight. Again, he won by a couple of rounds, and this, puts him in the hunt. This was basically a title eliminator where he should be able to get the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol. Now, that fight's been postponed to late 2024, so Canelo hasn't announced his September opponent. So the timing of this makes this very interesting, because Benavidez said that he's willing to come back to 168 and exercise his interim WBC champ status, one of the 3 belts that Canelo will still have now that he's, I believe, already vacated the IBF, because he probably won't be fighting William Skull, I don't think. But Benavidez said that he will be willing to exercise his interim WBC champ status against Canelo. Everybody, I think, wants to see Canelo versus Benavidez. If Benavidez could get back down to 168, which he says that he will, without issue, it's easier said than done. I mean, but I just have reservations about that. We've seen that go poorly in other fighters' careers, like Roy Jones going to heavyweight, then coming back down, having a difficult fight against Antonio Tarver, which Roy Jones won, and then giving Tarver the rematch and getting knocked out in the second round of that fight. So we see guys, go up in weight, try to come back down in weight, and make it happen. Now, David Benavidez is still in his 20s, so it's more doable now than if he was like in his mid-30s or something like that. But I don't know. You got to be careful with that stuff. So if he's already, you know, working out and in a position to where he could lose the weight somewhat comfortably, then yeah, I really want to see what they're going to do with the next Canelo fight. I still have a hunch that they're going to go in the WBA mandatory direction with Edgar Berlanga, which is just crazy that the WBA never made David Morrell Jr. a mandatory. And the moment Morrell declares that he's going up in weight and he loses his lesser WBA champ status in that division, they instantly make Edgar Berlanga the WBA mandatory. That's crazy. So I suspect that maybe that's the direction that Canelo will go. But boy, if Canelo doesn't like what he's been hearing up until this point, let him pick Berlanga and let him hear what he's going to be hearing if he goes that route. But I'm just holding out hope that they are able to make, and that Canelo is willing to make Canelo versus Benavidez. So yeah, I wasn't unimpressed with Benavidez's performance here. He's not invincible, you know what I mean? And it's going to be tough if he's going to be fighting the top 5-ish guys at light heavyweight, period. But yeah, he won via unanimous decision. And then again, Liam Paro upset Subriel Matias, where I issued out polls, and I'm going to, I should have posted the results before the fight, but the most lopsided poll that there was, and I was asking, who do you have and how? Do you have Tank over Frank via knockout or via decision? Who do you have between Benavidez and Gvozdyk, and, Antoine Russell and Puello, billam-smith and Riakporhe in their rematch? And who do you have between Subriel Matias and Liam Paro? And the most lopsided answers came in saying Subriel Matias stopping Liam Paro. I think something like 80% of y'all said Subriel Matias is going to stop Liam Paro. And I was looking at the betting odds, and Subriel Matias is what, like a 5.5 to 1 favorite. But style-wise, I was really wondering what Liam Paro was going to be able to do with Matias, and he did what I thought he might do. Now, he had to make it a gritty fight. He had to hold a ton, and the ref was a little bit terrible, I thought, to Liam Paro. Like, he took a point away for, I'm not even sure what he took a point away for. I think it was when they came up close and in the clinch, it was like a near rabbit punch or something. I think that's what but it's not like there were like a series of warnings, and then there were a bunch of warnings for things that should have been non-warnings. It just seemed like the ref was anti-Liam Paro from the early rounds. I don't know if it was because they were in Puerto Rico and Subriel Matias was the hometown fighter, but it just seemed like the forces were working against Liam Paro. But he fought his heart out, man, because, Subriel Matias did start trying to let his hands go, but Liam Paro never stopped moving. He never stopped throwing. He never stopped holding. He never stopped just doing everything that he could to maintain an edge in that round. And so, yeah, he won a close decision. Two of the scorecards had it 115 to 112, and that's because it would have been 116 to 112 had it not been for the point deduction. And then the third judge had it 116 to 111, so that would have been 117, 111. That would have been, or was, 9 rounds to 3 for Liam Paro. So Liam Paro did his thing. And again, I thought that he would be more durable than a lot of people thought. A lot of people thought that, by the 5th round, Liam Paro would be out of there. That's why I bet the over 7.5. I picked Matias to win via late stoppage, but I thought that Liam Paro would be a super game and formidable and durable opponent, which he was. But again, he gave Matias even a lot more than that, outboxing him. And Matias was so low volume in the first couple of rounds that I was wondering, is there something wrong with Matias? Did he undertrain for this fight? Is he so buying into his own hype? Does he just trust his ability to turn things around and to pour on the volume and to break the other fighter down so much that he is willing to just give up rounds, thinking it's almost like the old story of KC at the bat? I don't know if you know about that old fable where he just lets 2 pitches go and is I got this, because whenever I swing, it's going to be a home run. Did Subriel Matias think that he could just turn it on and let Liam Paro just kind of burn his punches in the first couple of rounds the way that Ergashev did, the way that Jeremias Ponce did? Was it just Did he think that it was going to be business as usual? Let the other guy like just throw a million punches in the first couple rounds. Then I start putting my foot on the gas and the opponent can't handle it. I don't know what was going on in that regard, but it's just interesting hearing the commentators start to turn, because in the beginning they're like saying, oh, Matias is doing this by design. He's, watch what happens when Matias gets going. I don't know if it was by the third round, fourth round, fifth round, but there came a point where you're wondering, this doesn't appear to be going according to Matias's plan. Like, I don't think this is going well for him right now. This isn't by design, because you could see him start throwing punches, but he was whiffing with a lot of punches. Like, he would throw punches and Paro would have already turned and would have been at an angle where Matias isn't able to hit him with what he's throwing. And then Paro comes back in and throws some more punches. So he kept Matias on a rough pace. And I think that most people thought that Matias was going to have him on a rough pace, which he did. I mean, Matias was still coming and trying to pour on the offense, but Paro never abandoned what he was trying to do. Yes, he would get caught on the ropes sometimes, but then he would hold, move some more, throw some more punches, and then try to reclaim the round and things like that. So props to Liam Paro. But yeah, this was a pretty busy weekend of fights. Let me know your thoughts on Tank versus Frank, on Benavidez versus Gvozdyk, on Liam Paro's upset over Subriel Matias becoming the IBF 140-pound champion, on Gary Antoine Russell versus Alberto Puello, on Chris billam-smith defending the WBO cruiserweight title against Richard Riakporhe, and if you saw any of the other fights, Carlos Adames versus Terrell Goucher, or Kyron Davis versus Elijah Garcia. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.